All right, I can only imagine that I'm here to represent a diverse perspective, since I don't necessarily fit the mold of most of the people in the room. And I felt like I had a choice to either try to represent biology and ecology or library and information science. I chose to go with the biological sciences aspect, but it turns out that there are several people in this room with backgrounds in botany and ecology, so you guys can fact check me here. But these are largely the definitions that have already been covered. The only addition that I would point out, or the only kind of distinction I would make, is that in addition to replicability, as it's been discussed so far as a way to verify the results of another researcher, experimental replicates, at least in experimental empirical sciences, are also something that happens within a study. That becomes your N, the number of times that you've repeated whatever it is that you're doing in, for example, a randomized block study design or something like that. And I guess the point that I want to make is that from my perspective, in the biological sciences, these concepts were developed as researchers tried to struggle with observations that the results of their studies changed when they varied the context in which they were carried out, either by the same person or different people in other places. So, but the idea that context is important is not lost on geographers. I mean, you could argue that that is the unique contribution of the discipline of geography. And this is a gross oversimplification, but if you kind of understand there to be a spectrum of geography as the study of context, or kind of helping others understand the importance of context and identifying patterns as they happen across space, et cetera, anchoring one end of the spectrum, and what I've kind of laid out here as experimental empirical research that understands the world to be able to be described by immutable laws that are independent of context, and the pursuit of replicability to require us to move to the left of this spectrum. At what point, there's a tension there, at what point do geographers kind of lose the very thing that was the unique contribution that they were making? Peter, talked about this tension this morning. And if you already answered the question, I missed it. But there's more, I think there's more to be discussed here. So that's replicability. If we take reproducibility as kind of a self-evident thing that we would like to pursue, I was trying to summarize my own experience in a single graphic. And this is what I came up with as a point of discussion, or perhaps a hypothesis, that at any point in time, I don't think that you can make progress on reproducibility without shifting the burden. You can't kind of move two of these balls forward without shifting more of the burden onto the third axis. So for example, if I mentioned in my introduction that I've done some work with scientific workflow softwares. They make data management really easy. They make it easy for the user. But gosh, you better have really solid software preservation in place in long term if you want to be able to reproduce those results. Similarly, or a different example, you can use open source self-documenting softwares that make that are presumably preserved long term by their user communities, that make the data management fairly easy, but there can be a learning curve, and that burden is shifted onto the user. But this is just a single point in time, and if there's a fourth dimension to this, it is time, and the opportunity there, I think, is in educating the next generation of researchers, whereby we can kind of make progress on all three of these dimensions towards reproducibility by teaching this as a core scientific value and skill set. That's it. Good.